Good morning, everyone. I love to quote George Burns when he said that the only smart person I know is my tailor, because every time I come for a suit, he takes a new measurement. Often we size people up and we assume this is who they are, or we even size ourselves up and we assume this is who we are. We don't leave room for growth. In this week's parsha, we have a double Torah portion. The first one, it talks about the day of Yom Kippur and the service in the temple where the Kohen Gadol would wear the 8 priestly garments and go into the Holy of Holies, and he would pray for forgiveness for the Jewish people. Actually, he wouldn't wear any gold to remind God of the golden calf, only white. And when he came out, the verse says, he took off his priestly garments, and he came into the tent of meeting, took off his priestly garments, v'hinicham sham, he put them down there. And Rashi says something fascinating from the Talmud. Rashi says that he took them off and never wore them again. Now it's interesting, the priestly garments, there's no limit when it expires. The regular garments, the Kohen could wear it till it's worn out. Months, years, whatever it takes till the clothing are worn out. But the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, he only wore his garments once, for one day. They were brand new. And when he finished, he put it away, never wore them again. The question is why? They're in good shape, they're in good condition. Who wears clothing for one day and never wears them again? The Kohen Gadol. Why? In the second parsha, which is Kedoshim, in the very beginning, it talks about holiness. And one of the things of holiness, it says you shouldn't make Elokei Masecha, a god made out of metal. Now we have a hard time understanding which Meshugana would worship a god made out of metal. Who would pray to a god made out of metal? But besides that, what's the Torah teaching us? That we shouldn't go out and make a god of metal? Is anyone going to go worship a god of metal? What does it mean? I once heard something very beautiful. You know, you go into Publix, you see the lobsters swimming around in the back. It's disgusting. It's repulsive, right? Even if it says Glock kosher, I wouldn't touch it at least, right? But people love lobster. But why did Hashem make lobsters? If we can't eat them, why did He make them? There's a very important lesson we can learn from lobsters. Lobsters have a very soft body and a very hard shell. You look at them in the fish tank, right? They're swimming around with this very hard shell. What happens is, the hard shell protects them from other creatures in the sea that shouldn't attack them, kill them. They have a hard shell. But what happens is, as the body grows, the lobster starts to feel very tight, very compressed. He's suffocating by the stifling shell, which is limiting him. So he goes into a quiet place and he sheds his hard shell and he grows a new shell, a larger shell. Now why does that take courage? Because when he sheds his shell, he's making himself vulnerable and exposed. And he could be attacked. But he knows that in order to live a free life, he has to shed the shell and grow. There are many times where human beings, like the lobster, we feel life is suffocating us. We feel stifled. We feel like we don't feel free. We don't feel like we could truly be ourselves. And it's because the shells we develop, sometimes from our childhood, are still small. We have to expand, we have to grow. But we don't want to shed our shell, because then we're exposing ourselves to be vulnerable, to make changes in our life. But we have to learn from the lobster that if you want to grow and you want to feel free and not feel compressed and depressed, you have to be able to shed your shell and grow a larger shell. And that's the idea, perhaps, of changing the clothing. The Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur is making a statement. His statement is, today's a new day. All the garments I wore before, that's yesterday. Today's a new beginning. I could wear new clothing, fresh clothing. I don't have to carry the old garments, the old baggage for the rest of my life. I could begin anew. And that's the idea of a metal God. A metal God is when our beliefs are set in metal. Metal doesn't change. It's not flexible. Sometimes I have my belief system and I never outgrow it. And the message is you have to grow. What you believed yesterday, there's always room for more growth and greater understanding of God and greater observance of Torah mitzvahs. The Yiddish word for God is Eibishter. Eibishter means above. Meaning wherever level you reach, there's always a higher level to achieve. And now we're in the days of the Omer, and in the Omer time, we remember the story of Rabbi Akiva, because his students passed away during this period, and that's the most inspiring story of all. Rabbi Akiva was 40 years old, he was a shepherd, he never learned Torah, he didn't know Aleph Beis. And when the Talmud says he was walking and he saw water dripping on a rock, and he saw the way the water created a crevice in the rock, and he said if the water could create an indentation in the rock, surely the words of Torah can penetrate my mind. And at the age of 40, he went to study Torah for the first time. became one of the greatest scholars of Israel. And the lesson is, no matter what age and what stage of life you are, don't be set. Realize you can wear new clothing. Don't make a god of metal. Always realize that even the lobster understands that life is all about growth and progress. And if you really want to be happy and you want to feel fulfilled, you just like you can't walk around with the clothing you wore when you were 10 years old or 15 years old, because you wouldn't be able, you would feel like you're in a straitjacket. You can't walk around with the spiritual garments that you wore when you were 10 and 15 and 20. As you're getting older, you have to grow and wear newer and larger size spiritual garments.